Tony, my man, welcome to the Happy Engineer podcast. Glad you're here.
Hey, Zach, and the other guy with the W last name. We always stood at the end of the line, but here we
That's
are at the
right.
front of the line together.
That's right. Last in line to first in line. That's so good.
Yeah.
How have you been since LA, man?
Man, all good. We're just doing some final wrap up on the event that we got coming up in Portugal in July and just speaking at a few different events since I saw you last.
Okay, brilliant. Well, speaking of saw you last, we're hanging in Los Angeles with Lewis Howes at his book launch event, and we got to talking, and one of my favorite topics came up, and it involves cars. So, Tony, really quick, recap what is your history with cars and maybe how we got to my favorite vehicle of all time, still to this day. But tell us, Tony and cars, where did that begin?
Yeah, I think since you have a audience of engineers, I think some of us are just born car guys. I actually pursued my mechanical engineering degree because of cars, because I wanted to know understand how everything worked and all the different systems. It kind of fascinated me. So, and my intention was going to school to maybe work at the big three and design Corvettes or
Sure,
Camaros, like the dream jobs, right, in the United
absolutely.
States. And I got sucked into the oil and gas because it just paid a lot more, but I still built businesses in automotive performance. So background, I guess my first company I started was in 2001. I created ls1tech.com, which is a General Motors performance car community. We grew that to over 300,000 registered members, multiple seven-figure business. And then I created the same business model with trucks, guys that like to race trucks, called performancetrucks.net. And we grew that one to about 280,000 registered members. Both those had the same advertising accounts from established relationships in that business model, about 150 advertisers. We did racing events around the country and all the hotbeds of the country to kind of get people off of their keyboards and off of their
Sure,
screen
yeah.
names. Because I'm a community guy. I want people to get off, come out and meet each other, race each other, become lifelong friends. And that's what we did. And we sold that company to a private equity company for a few million in 2007, 2009 exits. So I built some online e-com type businesses in the automotive wheel industry and run a business in the background as a seven-figure business just selling wheels, high-end forged wheels. And so I've always been in the automotive space and racing cars. And earliest part of my racing was more focused on drag racing because that's what I could afford at the time. And then somewhere around 2005, I started getting more into the road course and going to driving schools and getting more focused on the Corvettes and the Dodge Vipers and things that can actually go fast around the track instead of in a straight line only. And so that kind of led up to our conversation of my wife and I both have Dodge Vipers. I bought mine new when I sold that company in 2006, 2007. And then we got hers in 2014 when the Gen 5 came out with the TA. So one of
Ah,
33
so good.
cars, solid white.
So good. I know everybody's like, wait a minute, let's talk about these companies, and we will in a moment. But when you told me you and your wife both have Vipers and you raced Vipers, I still to this day have my steel wall poster, it's like printed on steel
Mm-hmm.
with the 1996
Yep.
blue with white stripes GTS when that came out. I still have it. I still love it. And there is just nothing that gets me more in that zone of passion around cars than talking about Vipers. So um, tell me from racing Vipers,
Mm-hmm.
what makes them the best and what makes it absolutely terrible?
With a Dodge Viper, they're all manuals. They never made an automatic Viper, period. So you have to actually become a better, more proficient driver to get good lap times. So, a lot of times people are like, oh, well, technology, dual clutch, this and that, and PDK Porsches. And guys, I can go the same speed around the track and at the same lap time as those guys in their own cars, but I could throw them the keys to Maya and they couldn't even come close
That's
because
right.
they don't know what it's like to run in a car with has, we just had ABS in the 2006 Viper, right? It doesn't even have traction control or any of that kind of nannies. So you really had to become a better driver. I mean, it's the earlier Vipers, the
Yeah.
Gen 4 and older, really just had ABS, except for like I guess 2000, the year 2000s when even ABS got introduced to the Viper in the Gen 2. So you get some early Gen 1s and Gen 2s that didn't even have anti-lock brakes, and you still had to be able to drive those very fast. So these cars handle exceptionally well. A lot of times people think, oh, it's a big V10, 8.3, 8.4 liter, and they can't handle. But guys, if you go look in history of all the Viper production years, they've set course records around the world. They've won some of the biggest racing events back when Dodge was involved in those racing. So they're actually built to be road race cars, although we see a lot of guys nowadays putting the giant twin turbos on them and going straight line 2,000, three
Sure.
thousand horsepower. So, my 2006, it's a blue with white stripe car. And when I bought that one, actually, I was more focused on the straight line stuff. And we built that to about 1,200 at the wheels. And so, supercharged nitrous car,
Wow.
took it all back down, making twin turbos and things like that, go to pursue 1,500. And that car went 209 miles per hour in a standing mile back when it was like 1,100 horsepower. So
Oh
my
man,
goal was to try to get to 200 miles per
that's
hour in a
so fun.
standing half mile. It went 188 miles per hour at about 1,250 at the wheels. And so 1,500 is kind of where you need the power to weight ratio to kind of achieve that 200 mile per hour and from 0 to half mile. So I've done it all in the Vipers, and man, I just like American cars. I really do. I appreciate all cars. I love exotics. I love all these different things, but I just really appreciate American cars, and they have so much character and charisma, and they're just very bold, and they're in your face. And
Yeah, yeah.
Viper productions are very low. And it's funny that you talked about the 96, the blue and white. That was actually a magazine center spread that I actually had on my cork board when I was in college. And I graduated in 1998, and they quit making them by then. So there's no way I could have afforded one at that time anyways, but I was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, maybe I'll get one used someday. And I never really thought about that. And then, I kept seeing this thing. We talk about visualization and stuff like that. So this blue and white Viper just kept reappearing in my life when I was writing and shooting for magazines in the automotive space. I would do reviews on cars, and sometimes a blue and white Viper would show up. And I was like, man, I could start to see myself, and I spend a whole day with these things and videoing them and taking photos with them and hearing them. It's like, man, I'd love to have that one day. And I don't know how I'm going to go buy $100,000 car. And it just kept working that way. And then a year later, after I did a photo shoot of one on GM High Tech Performance, a magazine I was a staff
Yeah,
member
yeah.
on, I was like, man, I'd love to have one of these. And the guys like they started making again 2006. They got a new Gen 3 blue with white stripes again. It's like, oh, that's awesome. I was like, dude, how much are there? He's like $96,000. Like, that's still a lot of money.
That's a lot of money.
And the next year, I sold my company for millions, and I was able to go buy one of those and just
Oh
write a
yeah,
check for it. So that's
love
the
it.
kind of thing I think about manifestation and visualization. I started back in 95 when that blue and white was like a concept car. And I was like, dude, I'm a Chevy guy. I love GM. But when that blue with white coupe came out, I was like, dude, that is sexy. It's like a Shelby Daytona coupe
Yes,
from the
exactly.
60s. It's like got the race cars, got the proportions. I love the stripes. Carroll Shelby had a lot to do with the design and development of the early Vipers. That's why it kind of went like a homage to him. And I never thought I would own one or much less have a couple of them now, but it's something that if you put it on your vision board, your brain will always work in the background to try to figure out that goal for you. That's why it's
Yes.
very important to visualize things and to see yourself in those and experience those even in an imagination, because eventually your brain's going to figure out that problem solving thing, and it's going to figure
Yep.
out how to get that
Yep.
for you.
Tony, there's like two or three things in that story that I love, and I want to unpack multiple of them. But one is this idea of becoming a better driver.
Hmm.
And I think engineers can relate to the challenge we face now that might be different than decades ago. Could argue it's been a trend in engineering since the beginning of whatever we would call engineering, but building on the back of the technologies that have come before us and to push that to the edge and beyond, there's more and more and more to come up to speed with. And in many cases, we just throw new engineers the keys to that incredibly high
Yeah.
tech vehicle and say, just take it around the track. But there's something about the fundamentals. And of course, every university is seeking to solve that problem. But what would you say is the equivalent in our careers and businesses of where we need to be intentional to become better drivers versus where it's okay to just take what's been created by the people who came before us and enjoy it without any concern for how we got here? What's the dance between those two? How do we make those decisions?
Man, that's a good one. Before I answer that, I wanted to give you a perspective I had about automatics versus manual transmissions.
Okay.
Back when I was drag racing, I'd go bracket racing where you had to dial your car and you basically had to write it down to the hundredth of a second. You had to run it right on that dot. You couldn't go faster than that or you would lose. So I was in the sportsman class, which was like the guys that had professional race cars. Like they were building these cars, and I had a manual. I was like the only manual in that class. And to give you an idea, the car was like mid 10 seconds, and this is like late 90s. And I won a lot of those events with a manual against a field of automatics. And here's the one perspective I'll share with you about good driving is the announcers knew that I was a manual driver. Like they knew it. And they'd be like, guys, can you hear how fast he's shifting? He's faster than these automatics. And I literally was. We timed the things. The funny thing about that is when you win with an automatic car, they say, hey, man, your car runs good. Car runs good. When you win with a manual car, they say, great driving. There's a big distinction between those two.
Yes.
So if you're trying to think about how we use this analogy for business or our careers, I would think that what are the things that we can control and become exceptionally good at on our own and challenge ourselves? Because yeah, we are in a world of automations, like you said, and engineers are always trying to figure out problems and reduce this and that. But there's certain skills that we should always retain, or at least skills that we should learn. We all went to engineering school to learn something, but why are people so looking forward to get rid of these kind of things that are actually valuable skills? Like for me, like communication, right? Public speaking, putting yourself on video, creating content, all these things that, yeah, we can have AI write out a blog post and put out your social media content and write a transcript. But at the end of the day, it's still a valuable skill that's not going to only apply for business, but your entire life. So if you're an introvert like you are and I am, we both know we are, we can also operate like extroverts when required. And we can put ourselves on camera, we can put ourselves on stage. And it was not comfortable for me to do that. But it was a skill that I was willing to go invest in, understanding that the longevity of having that skill set, I could transfer that to anything that I wanted to do in my entire life. And the businesses that I'm running now may be temporary, and that you may see me in 10 years doing something else, and in 10 years after that, seeing something else. So think about the tangible skills that you can go invest in and learn and become exceptional at, whether that's content creation. What I think everybody should be figuring out how to build a personal brand. I think everybody should have some kind of a evergreen content right now, whether that's a YouTube channel or a podcast. And then you should also be really understanding of the content you create, whether that's reels or shorts or things like that, because eventually, yeah, you may hire an editor, you have an editing team to go do that for you, but you're going to still want to understand how they do it, understand what the work is involved to be able to become a creator. That way you can also negotiate some of those service contracts.
Yes. Okay. So I know if I had my career engineer hat on, I'd probably start thinking, Tony, what are you talking about? Personal brands, content, podcasts. Why do I need all this stuff? Let's back it up. You come from the mechanical engineering background like myself. The work that you're known for today, your best-selling book, Side Hustle Millionaire, your podcast, 365 Driven, and the community, the society that you've built around this dream for many people of becoming entrepreneurs, of building businesses, exiting companies, and having those $1 million payouts plus, like you're talking about. So take me back. Where were you in life? What were you doing when you had the idea and started that first side hustle company that you told us about earlier?
I did interview with some of the suppliers in the big three when I got out of college, and man, it sounded like really interesting, fascinating work, but I did not want to live in the Detroit area. I'm a Houston native. We have better weather than you guys 6 months out of the year. And so I didn't want to deal with that. And then also the salary offerings were literally half the price. I think back then, starting salary for like a junior engineer, 32,000 a year, something really low, where in Houston, I could start out at 55,000 with the same level of experience. And I could stay home and I could actually afford the cars that I was going to go design. So I actually bought myself a Trans Am brand new when I graduated, because like, this is my gift to myself, because I landed a good salary. So that was my foray to go into the oil and gas, especially the offshore industry, which where I served for 20 years. But I still needed that creative outlet. I think early in my engineering career, I was more fascinated because I was doing some modeling with CATIA and Pro-E and learning new gizmos and learning how to code and stuff like that. So I loved being creating and building things. But eventually you start moving into that lower middle management range and you're not doing the technical things anymore. And you're just oversight and you're the QC and the leader type roles. And so you kind of have that itch where like, dude, I still like to create things, but I'm not really doing that anymore. I have 8 hours a day just managing personalities and helping people become better for themselves. And so that automotive thing, it was always the racing. And it's like, if I'm going to go race every week, why don't I just start an LLC and figure out how to make money doing that? That way it can fund my hobby.
Yes.
And to give you guys an idea, when I started that website, I didn't think about making millions of dollars. I just thought about, hey, my Trans Am, the car note was $500 a month. I said, if I could build something to make $500 a month in that industry, as a side hustle, that'd be pretty cool to make 500 bucks extra a month to pay for my car note. I have a
Yeah.
free car essentially. And
Yeah.
guys, it just grew and grew and grew. And within the first 8, 9 months, we were already making about $10,000 profit per month.
Wow.
And eventually we're making about 400,000 a year profit on the side business that didn't really require a lot of my time. Because you see, as engineers and people working in large corporations, especially, we understand systems, processes, and people, things that most small business owners struggle with because they don't even understand org charts. They don't understand processes. They
Yeah.
don't understand risk mitigation. They don't understand cash flow management. But these are things that we get exposed to in corporate, especially if you're managing projects that
Yeah.
you can apply. So if you guys are out there thinking about entrepreneurship and you're working in a corporate setting, start paying attention to the things that they do, especially at a project level, because if you think about that, it's very similar in operations to a small business. So get your hands on those contracts and get your hands on the money and managing the people. And you start to realize, like, man, all the stuff that I'm learning are actually getting paid to learn. Sometimes even extracurricular lessons and things that they would send us to, these leadership courses and stuff. I can apply that. So I built these companies with the right processes and systems early on. I was the person. And eventually, within a year, I was able to make enough money to put the other people in there to manage the servers and manage the securities and,
Mm-hmm.
do all the stuff, the graphic design and the coding and all that stuff. So that's the way it grows. And I had this really demanding career at the same time, being gone and offshore and sometimes in different countries. I worked in all over Europe and in Africa. And so I couldn't be online all the time. I had to be able to build this thing to work without me. And, that's why my book, Side Hustle Millionaires, because I literally had to build this thing that did not require my presence after the first year that still made millions of dollars.
Yes. I think the lens that you just painted is one that many engineering leaders struggle to put on, that, oh, I work in the Fortune 500, so I don't have what it takes or the awareness or the skill set, or, I'm very scared. There's a lot of fear about starting some kind of business, whether it's full-time entrepreneurship or side hustle, either one. There's this default setting that, well, I don't really know what that's all about because I work in the Fortune 500. And if you flip that on its head and say, well, wait a minute, there's something the Fortune 500 is doing to be in that level of elite company that has grown and scaled to that place. Like, let's go look for the key pieces that you're going to be able to leverage and get your education for free from your current company.
Getting paid to get that education.
Yeah, even better.
It's odd though. I mean, I get it. You're wired that way. I'm wired that way. Most people in the employee space, we'll call it for what it is, are not wired that way. Most of them are too heavily focused on their day-to-day tasks.
Yeah.
That's what they think that their benchmark is measured by. And hey, if I keep doing a good job, I'll get a promotion, a 3% raise, or maybe a 10% raise if I change companies. Like, you think these really small building blocks and you create these false glass ceilings of what your limit of your potential is. And so you're so heavily focused on tasks, especially if you're overworked or underappreciated, both of the combination of those. And you don't really have that awareness to step back and see the bigger picture. Some people maybe step back a little bit and they focused on their department. Maybe you're in the engineering department or the projects department. So you kind of get an idea of how that works. But if you really start to understand awareness, you take a bigger step back and go, hey, how does projects interface with logistics and register over here with accounting and legal and the contracting and operations? Like, we need to start to see the interfaces between all these different departments and what do they need and what do they need and how do I best serve them? And are we being redundant with our communications over here? So you start to see the building blocks of an entire organization, which is how a CEO looks at a company. They look at all of these things like a dashboard. Every department is a dashboard within an organization, and they have to make sure that each of these departments is operating almost independently because they're still having to put out some kind of positive work, but also what are the interfaces and the friction that goes on between these things. So if you can work even from a junior project engineer type level, but also take a big enough step to have the awareness to go, hey, what I do here affects these 3 different departments in this way, and this is why I shouldn't do it that way, man, you're going to have a way better head start of understanding what you can do for small business.
100%. Tony, I had in my corporate days a relentless focus on creating mentorship relationships in every area of the business for this reason. Deep curiosity about how does the marketing organization do what they do, what's engineering doing and how they relate, what's going on in finance, what's going on in the logistics and supply chain side of the business, talking about branding, go talk to the people who are building these brands. I went at Whirlpool, we have a lot of different brands that we owned and appliances. And how does the Maytag team think differently from the KitchenAid team, from the Whirlpool team, and how are they making those decisions? All of that stuff. So I just think it's underutilized, especially within a big company. How many people will gladly give you 20 minutes or 30 minutes of their time over a cup of coffee and answer any question you ask them? And to get that same education in any other way would cost you a fortune. Like, it's really a powerful thing to go do. So I wanted your perspective on this before I go deeper on how do we launch a side hustle or do what you've done, which of course, everybody wants to know, like, how do I go get my $1 million payday? But is there a bad time or a wrong time for someone to take a dream or a passion, something they would want to create a side hustle around and launch? Would you ever tell somebody, look, it sounds great, but now is not the time for you? I'm curious if there's ever a situation where you would coach somebody that way.
If we're looking at it from the context of a side hustle, no, there's never a bad time, because most people will use that as an excuse. Like, I don't have time, and this and that. But the reality is that nobody has time. It's the same situation, and people still have figured it out. So you need to start looking at your day-to-day activities. Most people don't manage time. If someone tells me, hey, I don't have time, I tell them to pull out their phone and show me their calendar. And then they look at you with the deer in the headlights look, because they know that you just called them out, because they don't even have a calendar that they operate from.
Sure. Or even worse,
like,
look at their screen time app and you get 5 hours on Instagram. And
there's so much evidence out there. So here's a mental trick for you. If this is hitting you in the core, which I hope it does, whatever you're doing every day, whatever tasks you are doing every single day, start calling those your priority. So if you're deciding to start playing the video games after work every day, call that your priority and see if that sits with you well. And if it's your priority, awesome. If you're making money as a gamer, like, cool, that's your priority. But if you're spending 2 or 3 hours doing that and you call it your priority, is it really leading you to a potential destination that you would identify as your dream life? And if not, then maybe it's not really your priority. Maybe you need to start calling yourself out. So when I go to the gym every day, that's a priority, because that's a very important meeting with myself, and I want the results. And I think health is number one above all things that you can achieve, because without health, the wealth doesn't matter. People would pay whatever wealth they have to regain their health once they lose it. So understand that health is more valuable than wealth. And so start calling everything a priority. And if that hurts when you say that's your priority, like sitting on the couch watching Netflix is my priority, yeah, that sounds really stupid. And it should be stupid, because that's your priority. That's what you're spending your time on. So, that's a little mental trick there. But dude, it's you got to just get out there and do something, man.
Yeah. I love this answer. I'm not surprised, knowing our conversations before, to hear you say that, but everybody wants to go find the reason why now is not the perfect time to go start these things. The most common rebuttal is, but Tony, I'm already working 50 hours a week or more in my W-2 job, and I've got 3 kids at home and all these responsibilities around the house. Like, if I start a side hustle business, something's going to suffer, right? It's just this default setting that people bring into their life, that there's no solution to this time problem. And I'm with you 100%. Like, okay, then to either change the vision, stop talking about wanting this because you're never going to get it, or let's change the mindset and start asking new questions and shape this in a different way. So if you were going to take me, so here's Zach White, back me up to 2009, 10, when I was first thinking about side hustle businesses in a more serious way. I already did own a couple companies at the time, but if I said, hey, Tony, I need help, I really want to get after this and build a side hustle to something substantial, where do I begin? What are those fundamentals? What would you say is the starting point?
Hey, let's borrow some skills from project management here. Maybe you'll start to visualize this. With every project, we have a defined result that we would like to achieve, don't we? We have a level of quality, we have a budget, we have a schedule, and we have the deliverables list that we have to complete in order to close out the project. Well, think about that as your lifestyle or the business that you want to create. That's the end goal. That's the delivery. You can define that. Everybody's got a different answer. There's no right answer. And so once you define the deliverable, you need to assess that against the timeline that you're giving yourself. If it's 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, be realistic, right? And you're going to start to see gaps already forming. Maybe like, hey, I don't have enough financials here to get this thing launched, or I don't have enough resources, which is employees or contractors, to be able to achieve this. Like if you're bidding this thing out as a project, like would it be realistic to you, and be really realistic with that, and understand that, yeah, you may improve with time, but factor that into your long-term. You can use an Excel spreadsheet to do this. You can do it on a napkin. Don't overthink this. Okay. And then you start to identify what are the individual tasks that I need to accomplish in order to achieve that project, that result, that business, that lifestyle.
Yeah.
How much do I need to earn on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis to achieve the financial goals that we have? And so once you start to work backwards from your goal of your lifestyle or the business model that you want to have, sometimes you're going to have the hard reality that the things just don't add up properly. And that's okay, because that's the reality check. And just like a project, you'd be like, hey, no bid, we can't achieve this. We have to throw more resources at it here in third quarter, or we got to have more startup capital to be able to do that. So I don't want that to discourage you. I just want you to understand that this is the thought process from even small businesses, widgets being built at your kitchen table and trying to scale that, or even starting a multi-million-dollar or billion-dollar company. You should all have that same thought process. And now here's the thing that most people get discouraged. They go, hey, I want to build this dream business. I want to make $1 million a year. And they start doing the planning, and then they realize like, oh man, I'm going to have like $500,000 in startup capital to even get this thing off the runway. Like I don't have that kind of money, and nobody's going to let me borrow that. You're right. So
Yeah, exactly.
most people will quit. They'll be like, I guess entrepreneurship's just not for me. I can't do that. And that becomes like the roadblock. But real entrepreneurs get creative. They go, hey, what smaller businesses could I create with the given revenue, the given income, the given resources, or the knowledge, or the special access to tools or software that I have that I can already utilize? Like, what are the things that I can use right now to build maybe that $500,000 business? And if that starts to cash flow, you put that reinvestment back in there, and eventually you get to the next size business, and you keep growing these businesses like a staircase. Like you just start out small, start out with what you can. Learn, take the lessons when it's inexpensive and you get punched in the face a bunch of times.
Yes.
And then you go build the mid-sized business, then the next one, the next one. Eventually you will be owning the one that you really wanted in the first place, but there's no skipping steps there. Like you can't do these large jumps without capital raises. And, we can go all into that with the social media and all the Silicon Valley type startups that look at their valuation based on capital raises, which to me is false. It's not real valuation. So real entrepreneurs understand how to operate and make a profit.
First of all, the valuation comment makes me chuckle because my partners in private equity, we talk a lot about the VC world, and I get it. I understand the model.
Gambling.
It's fine.
It's gambling at that point.
Yeah, it is a whole different world. And you look at some of these, valuations. I've got a company we are invested in right now that has a 8-figure valuation, but I look at their monthly financials. It's not that different from my business. It's like, wow, okay, well, that's interesting.
Gambling. It's legalized gambling at that point.
So I love the project management perspective. And for engineers, especially, we want to see side hustles and entrepreneurship as this completely separate animal. And if you'll just acknowledge the skill sets we have, look at it through that systems engineering lens, these skills around managing resources, time, capital, people, and
risk.
Then risk for sure. If there's a huge gap, I like if it's a no bid, which resonates for me deeply.
You
It's
just
like
say no.
this
You
doesn't
move
work.
on.
Yeah. And then rather than pout about it and say, I guess I will never have the dream life, go find a different, smaller step and just go. I think that's really, really powerful. So tell me, for you, in the world of breaking free from this W-2 life, one of the things that I've personally struggled with, and I mean, you've done it extremely successfully at a level beyond what I have, we get latched into some identity of who we are as an engineer in that context of our corporate life. And sometimes that creates the anchors or the friction to becoming the entrepreneur that we're totally capable of becoming, but we're not living into it because the identity is stuck or linked to this other version of ourselves. So I know we chatted about that a bit before we hit record today. Can you tell us how you see that challenge, and then how did you overcome it yourself?
A lot of my engineering was based around a scarcity mindset because I grew up without money. And so in the American dream, they tell you go to pursue being a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer to go make 6 figures. So that was my dream. I'm 50 years old for context here. And I said, hey, I like cars. Is there some way to go to school, learn something about cars? And they're like, oh, yeah, that's mechanical engineering. It's like, okay, cool. I was very average at math, but I had to figure that out, obviously, just study and apply myself. So every engineer I've ever met in my entire life has a level of intelligence. Let's be real. You're not dumb to go to engineering school. Like there's no way to get through it. You can't fake it in
Yeah.
engineering school, any engineering. You have to realize that sometimes we build our identity because we come from a lower status or socioeconomic level. So we think that, hey, if we become a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, all of a sudden we're an elevated status. So you start building your identity around this degree or that persona. And when people introduce
Mhm.
themselves, they always want to tell their occupation. And hey, saying engineer is actually pretty impressive because they know that so few people have that. And when people hear that you went to an engineering school, they go, oh man, you must be smart. And so you got all these like endorphin releases about being an engineer. Like I'm pumping you guys up because it's the truth. The problem is that you start to build your identity around being an engineer and you start to limit yourself and what your potential is, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, well, what's greater than being an engineer? It's like being an entrepreneur, being an owner, being a CEO, being a founder. All those are greater than being an engineer. I hate to tell you, like it's you don't require these levels of education. And in fact, you're going to look at all the studying you did and all the money that you spent on that education, and the scarcity mindset will step in and say, well, wouldn't it be a waste to walk away from all that? Wouldn't it be a waste to waste that 10 years, that 20 years, that 30 years of occupational experience as an engineer? Like you keep this crap in your head. And I've literally have friends I've known 20, 30 years in the oil industry that still believe this kind of stuff. And, my engineering degree is still hanging on the wall downstairs. It's got dust on top of the frame. It's not being used anymore. I don't miss that part of my life. I learned a lot. I'm very grateful for that opportunity, but that was an old identity that no longer serves me. And when you start thinking about leaving your profession and leaving that industry and things like that, understand that that was just one chapter of your life. And you're going to have a lot of takeaways from that, but it isn't your identity. You're meant to
Yeah.
do greater things than just to limit yourself to being an engineer. Engineer is a great thing, but you have far more potential. So don't build your identity around like, well, I'm an engineer and I'm an engineer. And to give you an example of that, I remember being in my 20s and hanging out on the car forums. When you're a 20-year-old engineer, man, you're cocky. You have like this ego about you, right? You're like, man, I'm fresh graduated and I can do calculus 3 and partial differential equations and I know physics and I know chemistry. And when people challenge your intelligence, you kind of get triggered by that, don't you?
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
like, well, I'm gonna keyboard grenade and respond back and show everybody how intelligent I am. And like, that's a young engineer. That's how that 20 year,
Yeah.
like, I hope some 20
Yeah.
year old engineers are like, that's me. Like,
Oh,
I'm always got to be
I'm
right.
not that person anymore, Tony, but I have multiple bosses at Whirlpool who, if they hear this conversation, are like, "That was Zach." What? I'm
See,
sure I
like,
was
that's
that
what I
way.
mean. Like, that's your, like, you're still,
Yeah.
you've earned a degree, but you still don't feel like you deserve the status and you got to prove
Mhm.
something. You're building that identity around the persona of that title, right? When you get in your 30s, you're more focused on operations. I can't speak for women, but most men are really focused on just making money and applying what they know and trying to climb the corporate ladder as fast as they
Mhm.
can to mediocre middle management, right? You lose a little bit of that in your 30s, and then you start getting in your 40s and you start becoming a little bit more retrospective and start looking back and go, man, I was like really cocky in my 20s just because I had a degree. And as a 40 something year old engineer looking back, you're like, man, I didn't know crap in my 20s. Like, I thought I was smart back then. Really didn't know crap about crap. And so it's kind of funny when you look back. And now that I'm 50,
Mhm.
I'm looking back even at age 40 and go, man, I thought I knew a lot at 40, but I really didn't know a lot about at 40. So to give you perspective of that, I sold my company at 34. I was a 34-year-old multimillionaire and I thought I knew a lot at 34. At 40, I look back at 34 and said, man, I didn't really know a lot. Now I'm at
Didn't.
50 looking back at 40 going, man, I really didn't know a lot. So you will always learn if you're investing in the skills and the knowledge
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
experiences and things in your lifetime. And that's a great thing. So don't let your current identity, your current job title, all that be who you are. You're destined to do way better things than that.
Mhm. I've had many clients, Tony, who are in those, late 30s, 40s stretch where they're asking those hard questions in terms of, is this it? I made that middle management
Oh,
role.
yeah.
I've been stuck here for a while. I don't really know if I want to go try to be CTO in this huge company. I see that lifestyle, what they're doing. I'm not sure if that's for me. Of course, already limiting ourselves that there's no other way to be a high level executive than to give up your whole life for the company. But that's a whole nother episode for another day. What I appreciate from your perspective and what I challenge my clients into is to say, look, if it's truly your authentic vision, your passion, your desire to be an engineer only for the rest of your career, awesome. Let's go make that the best experience possible. Make the money you want to make, learn the things you want to learn, solve the problems you want to solve. Like, let's go do that. But be careful. Let's not assume that that's true just because you stepped into our coaching on day one thinking that's what you wanted, or you feel triggered by what Tony just said about the fact like, oh, being a CEO, a founder, an entrepreneur is greater. It's like, no, it's not. You feel that sense of defending that position.
Oh yeah.
Like, let's just
I
be
still feel
open.
it, Zach. I still feel it saying that.
Yeah, it's like, forget Tony. You're not changing the world through technology. I'm solving. Just that willingness to step back, be coachable for yourself, leave the ego at the door, and say, what would be, to your point, back to the project management example, what's the lifestyle or the dream, the vision, the thing that lights me up the most? I'm going to give myself room to step out of the core identity of engineer for a minute and imagine something greater. What would that be? And if greater to you is another PhD and more technical work as an engineer, awesome. But I think too many times it's so ingrained. It's running in that subconscious. It's like, this is the blueprint of who I am that we're rooted into. And we don't give that bigger version of ourselves a chance to breathe. That's part of why I love coaching engineers, because when they do, wow, it's fun to watch people come to life. And as long as, again, you're really being honest with yourself. I don't think there's a wrong answer, but let's make sure we get to your answer. A lot of people don't take the time to do that.
Yeah, when I was looking in the middle management ranks, I was on that executive path later in my career. It doesn't take a brilliant person to look down the path, really down the cubicle line, and see the little bit bigger offices as you get closer to the nicer part of the building. And you kind of look at who's in those offices and you go, okay, that guy's 10 years ahead of me. This guy's 20 years ahead of me and 25. And I started seeing that vice presidents, you can usually hit, when you're 35, 40 years old. That's kind of like early aggressive kind of years for mid-size, large-size Fortune 500 companies. But then to become executive level, what I started noticing in the last 10 years of my career was that most of these guys were getting promoted the last 5 years of their career. So they would pay their dues, air quotes, for 40 something years. And then at age 60, they would get picked to be a vice president of some large division or some entity, in the company, to really just pump up their pensions or their retirement packages, and they leave. So it's like, dude, I got to wait 20 more years to make a base income of 400,000 plus all the perks. I'll probably be making $1 million a year plus maybe 2 million by then with inflation. But I got to wait 20 years for that. It's like, I can go start a business and do that in 2 or 3 years. Like, why would I wait 20 years for that?
We need to have a little mic drop moment right there. Tony, if someone feels afraid, one of my things, my company is Oasis of Courage. We talk about courage a lot. I think fear blocks a lot of capable, ready now, with great ideas, who have all the skills you described today. That clock could start tomorrow to having this successful business if they wanted to, but they're afraid to do it. What would you say to that person if you really are just, the uncertainty, the unknown, the fear of this is holding you back from action? What's Tony's words of wisdom from your experience and having done this?
Well, having interviewed hundreds of entrepreneurs for the book and hundreds of entrepreneurs for the show, I'll tell you the number one fear that they have is not starting sooner. Overwhelmingly, probably 80% of entrepreneurs, Zach he's nodding his head. So not starting sooner is the most popular heartburn that they have. And so if you know that that's the number one thing, then that should help you make a decision a little bit quicker. And you should feel fear. You should feel fear with anything that you're starting new. You should feel fear if you're never worked out before and you want to go start and become physically fit, or you want to start a company. Or at age 50, I started skateboarding again after 36 years away from it. So I had some fear around these things. But as soon as you could start realizing that fear is an indicator for potential growth, and that there's opportunities that are always on the other side of those fears and the challenges that you're faced instead of the ones that you're procrastinating and putting off. Usually that thing you're putting off, the thing you're procrastinating the most, is because you understand internally that the gravity around that thing and the significance value of that thing is what's keeping you from investing the skills or time or knowledge or love or attention into going in that direction. So if you start realizing that fear and challenge are actually indicators of where I'm going to grow in life, you start becoming more aggressive and taking those things head on and figuring out, hey, if I can get through this challenge, then I can be focused on the smaller challenges on the backside. And that's the way you should live. So you should feel fear, but also we get to choose our hard in our life. Realize that.
Ooh, yeah.
Entrepreneurship is hard. Employee setup is hard. They're hard. We all get to choose it's hard. So don't look at the guys that are on social media complaining about their entrepreneurship, like, oh, it's so hard and we don't have any friends and there's critics and I got to work 12 hours. There's a lot of boohoo people, entrepreneurship people out there, just like there's boohoo employee people out there. So don't listen to either of those sides because they're just drama queens trying to get attention or empathy or sympathy for probably bad decisions. Let's be real, right? So when you think about choosing your hard, as an employee, I think it was actually harder because I had to ask or beg to have a 3% raise with inflation. I had to ask for permission to take time off to go on vacation. I had to ask if I had to come in late or leave early. I had to ask all these things, these permission. Like these are your freedoms that you have to ask somebody, and sometimes you get the title promotion without the raise because they just want to keep you around. Hey, if we just give you a manager at the end of whatever your current title is, then maybe we'll pacify you long enough to replace you with someone that costs less. So there's all these games and political things, and I don't have to suck up to those kind of things, and I can say whatever I want. I used to remember working for these large corporations and not being able to say what I really wanted to say on social media. So you're being restricted because there's potential backlash. So there's all these restrictions that come from being an employee that largely disappear when you're a business owner. So you get to choose your hard, right? I get to choose how much I decide I want to make based on the performance I put into the company versus waiting in line between all these inept kind of like weak managers that I'm waiting for them to retire or leave the company for me to be able to take that seat from them. So there's certain situations you can control and have a lot more freedom in the entrepreneurship space if you build the right business model. So you should be scared, right? You should be scared because I also think about the entrepreneur. We saw this in COVID in 2020 when there's these mass companies just being laid off because of lockdowns and stuff like that, mandates. If you're an employee, you had no choice in that. They just walked up to you and said, hey, tomorrow's your last day. And I've been laid off many times in the oil industry. There's a lot of cycles in that industry. So there's a lot of risk. And you think that it's steady paycheck and you think that that's the thing to have. It's not
steady
true
until it's not.
Dude, it's realize that your employment is always one person's decision from existing. One person. You make your supervisor angry or they have a bad day or someone up higher on the chain says, hey, cut these heads off right here because we need to shave down 25% of our workforce. So keep the cheapest, least experienced person possible in each seat to keep those seats warm. So when the industry comes back around, maybe we'll start to rehire the veterans again. Like once you get past age 40, you start to see ageism and salaryism dictate your career.
Sure.
And you start realizing, I don't really like this game. I liked it when I was younger and cheaper because I always had a job, right? So it's a game that people play. Entrepreneurship, COVID, yeah, they close down your business. You go, well, I've got a merchant account, understand process and systems, got a pretty kick-ass team of people that are very creative. We can pivot. We can use the infrastructure, the equipment or the website stuff, and we can just sell something completely legal that they allowed. So you had options to stay employed as an entrepreneur, where as an employee, it was just like, hey, your last day is today. And I've been there and it's tough. So choose your hard.
The thing that comes right after choose your hard that I tell my clients too is success at whichever hard you choose doesn't mean no problems. Success just means better problems. You get to choose which problems are different problems. Yeah, it's like, would you rather have the problem of being unemployed and having no money or the problem of having a business that's growing fast and you have to keep learning and figure out what to do with the money you have? Like they're both problems, but which one would you rather be in? Tony, this is awesome, man. I know you've gonna inspired some people who want to get off the proverbial couch of what they're doing today and want to bring this to life because that fear of not starting sooner may be triggering in folks. So where can people find your book, your work, get connected with support if they want to get into this side hustle game?
Well, I would invite everybody that's listening, since you're podcast enthusiasts. I have a podcast called 365 Driven. It's on all the major platforms, and we're about to hit year 5 in a couple months here. So it's been going pretty steady, mostly entrepreneurship focused, but we get into health, wealth, mindset, and relationships because I think that all those are equally important. I don't really care if you're financially rich, but you're fat. You got to fix both of those kind of things, right? So the other website everybody would go to find all the information on social media and stuff, my website's 365driven.com. So 365driven.com.
I can only say positive things about all of Tony's content. So if you're listening now, go check it out, get a copy of the book, and follow the podcast. You're going to get a ton of value from it. If you're not sure about starting a business, just dabble, get some information, see, get into that place of openness. And I think what Tony has to say is tremendous. And I love that these 4 cornerstones of success that your podcast is built around, because I say the same thing. There is no amount of success in your career that can make up for failure in your health, in your relationships, etc. So love that. Tony, to land the plane here, or I should say to cross the finish line, we can't use an aviation analogy with a car.
We're going racing analogies today.
That's right. We got to cross the finish line. As an engineer, as an entrepreneur, and now as a coach to top performing entrepreneurs and executives around the world, great questions lead if we want great answers. Questions lead, answers follow. So if someone wants a better answer in their life, they want that happiness, that success, they want to get to that next level, what would be the question that you would lead them with today?
The answer is always who, not how. Who has demonstrated excellence or results in the thing that you would like to achieve? Who has already figured out all the stumbling blocks and the problems that you have or you're facing, or the challenges? Realize that no problems are unique nowadays. Every problem or challenge that you face has likely been solved or shared by millions of other people in the past and present people. So start thinking about these kind of questions about who has that answer. How can I get that from them? Can I pay them? Can I hire them? Can I buy their course? Can I get some education? Can I get them as a mentor? Start surrounding yourself with who, not how. So most people, when they're kind of in that scarcity mindset, they're always like, oh, how am I going to solve this? How am I going to fix that? How can I afford that? Like they're always how, because they're so focused on themselves. And I get that that's lack of self-awareness. But successful people think about who has the answers, who has the resources, who has the networks,
yes,
who has the things that I can go get from, and by joining their things or going to their events and things like that. Or you're listening to a podcast because you're listening to who, not how as well.
Engineers need that message. We love our hows, y equals f of x, man. But who, not how. Tony, thank you so much. I'm planning my trip to Houston. I got to come see these Vipers and get my picture with you and your beautiful bride and hang out, get a picture with the car. So excited about that. And thanks so much for your generosity, your time today. Just want to acknowledge you and the work you do. Appreciate so much you being here, Tony.
Hey, good to connect again. And I'm always happy to help you out, brother.